Hi there, it's Llarold. Today I'm going to be talking about class tuning. Back in Shadowlands and BFA, Blizzard's approach to class tuning was to do it on major patches or just not at all. Not great. Now they're rolling out major class tuning on random Tuesdays. It's a bit weird, but it's an improvement. So before I dive into the class changes being rolled out today, depending on when and where you're watching this, here's a quick news update on what's happening in Azeroth. The Darkmoon Fair is up, you can go get some easy profession knowledge from that. The Valentine's Day event, Love is in the Air, is up, so do that and try to get a mount. I keep being told that the drop rate on the mount was increased, but I haven't gotten a mount. I don't know anyone who's gotten one, so maybe it went from 0.001 to 0.01. Great. And community feasts have gone from a 3.5 hour cooldown to a 90-minute cooldown, which is pretty nice. Yes, chef. All right, now let's talk about those buffs. The first tank that's getting buffed is Blood DK. Now, Blood DKs are super strong right now. They're the second most popular tank in the game after Protection Warriors and ahead of Demon Hunters, which are surprisingly third on popularity. Why would Blood DK need buffs? They're so popular and so good. Their damage is wretched. It's bad in single target, it's super bad in AoE, and here are some examples from logs. These are 95th percentile logs of some mythic raid bosses. Here we have Taros, a single target boss here, and this isn't gospel, but it's a good metric just to indicate. Blood DK, bottom of the pack. All right, AoE fight here. Primal Council, Blood DK, bottom of the pack by an even bigger margin. All right, Kurog Grim Totem, a 2-target fight for the most part. Blood DK, bottom of the pack. They're not just bad at damage, they're the worst at everything when it comes to damage. Now, the positive here is that all of these buffs, which are quite substantial when you just look at the list, will basically wind up being a passive increase to Blood's damage output. You're not going to have to shift talents around or relearn how to play the class. You just get a 3 to 5% buff in single target and an 8 to 10% buff to damage in AoE. This might wind up being a little conservative on Blizzard's end, but I think it's a good start, and I think that given how insanely tanky Blood DK is, buffing them up to do damage that's competitive with the top end of tanks rather than just sort of middle of the pack would basically just make them overpowered super tanks. If a tank's unkillable, does the most damage, does the most healing, has extremely strong cooldowns, and group utility that's totally unique in the form of grips, why wouldn't you just run that tank all the time? That would kind of kill all the other tanks. So I think this buff is right on the money here. It's conservative and DK damage will still be on the lower end, but it's not going to be an absolute dumpster fire like it is right now. The second tank that has been buffed is Bear Druid. They're generally regarded as the worst tank in the game right now, and I don't really think that's the case in Mythic Plus, at least. Even if it is true, they're close enough that I don't think that they're actually bad. I do think they do pretty well for themselves now that the new talents that were added in patch 10.0.5 have all been fixed. But the initial impression was bad because all of the unfixed but reported bugs, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. Unlike Blood DK, Bear's AoE damage is extremely strong. Let's go back and look at those logs again. This is Primal Council, an AoE fight. You can see Bear's listed at like 3rd overall on average, but if we sort by max, number 1 by a big margin. Yeah. Their single target damage, also pretty competitive. Taros here, you know, they're clearly in the top 2, very strong. 2-target cleave, hey, what do you know, best in the game. Bear's damage is good, great actually. They don't really need offensive buffs. What Bear needs is more defensive power, and specifically more defensive power against spell damage. Bear has high armor values already. It does really well against auto attacks. Magic damage rips right through a Bear. What Bear is getting is kind of a random shotgun of damage or defensive buffs. It's getting a baseline armor buff to Iron Fur, which I won't complain, but it's kind of like finishing lunch and then being handed a free sandwich. Okay, great, I guess. It's also getting a buff to some really underwhelming talents in the middle of the tree, which I have a tree pulled up here. It's getting buffs to Layered Mane, Reinforced Fur. These are two talents that you don't really take much. And Reinvigoration, which is a talent you really only take because you need it for pathing into Earthwarden. Ultimately, these are major buffs to underperforming talents, so maybe they'll make for a fine, okay, like passive or easy to play talent setup for raiding. I still don't think they're all that great right now. They do have good offensive synergy with Thorns of Iron, this talent down here on the bottom right side that deals damage based on your armor value when you cast Iron Fur. It's okay as a damage talent in raid, but again, I don't really think that this will wind up shifting the meta around in Bear's favor. The main highlight here is this huge buff right here to Ursoc's Fury. Ursoc's Fury is this talent down here in the bottom left of the spec tree. This is actually a pretty good talent buff that I think is flying under the radar. This is really only useful in a build that goes to the left side of the bottom of the tree, which you can see I have built up here. This is really only for Mythic Plus or a pure AoE fight like Primal Council. I absolutely think this is the best build for Mythic Plus, way better than the Moonfire focus builds that players used earlier in the expansion, and even I recommended using right at the start of patch 10.0.5 because the highlight talent of this side of the build, Raise, was bugged at the time and has been fixed, and this all works really, really well. So this buff to Ursoc's Fury adds a ton more defensive value onto this already good build. So I'm a huge fan of this one aspect of the changes being made to Bear Druid. Finally, bears are receiving a very strange buff to Lunar Beam. I like the idea of Lunar Beam. Reducing its cooldown from the bizarre 75-second cooldown to a more normal 60-second cooldown is great. That's not weird. Boosting its healing is weird. It already does a decent amount of healing. The damage it deals is horrendous. It deals atrocious damage, like 20,000 damage for the full cooldown. Comparing that to Maul, a totally unbuffed Maul does 22,000 damage, so like 10% more. For an allegedly major offensive cooldown, you would expect Lunar Beam to do more than one Maul. It's very undertuned. It synergizes nicely with all of the talents in the Bear Druid tree, like Fury of Nature and Ellune's Favored, that make you deal more arcane damage and heal for some of the arcane damage that you deal. So there's potential for it to be a really valuable offensive and defensive cooldown, but the damage scaling is too low. It really would make a lot more sense if this change right here was to increase the damage and reduce the cooldown. That would be perfectly reasonable, and it would have a nice self-healing synergy thanks to Ellune's Favored. Very strange decision to just make this a purely defensive buff to a talent that's literally worth like 300 DPS. At least it looks cool. So basically this just means that Bear Druids are going to be a good deal tankier in Mythic Plus and a little bit tankier in raids. This probably won't fix the fact that they're super unpopular right now, but I really think that's a result of Blizzard completely failing to stick the landing on the talent redesign. The class is actually pretty good in Mythic Plus right now, even before this set of buffs is in, and they are quite substantial. I felt that my Druid, who is like 15 item levels behind my Monk, feels like it's about as tanky as my Monk in Mythic Plus. Except for the first boss of Ruby Life Pools who just spams your face full of Frost Bolts. That is the one boss that really sucks on a Bear Druid, but other than that, I basically felt no real pain anywhere else on Fortified weeks or Tyrannical weeks. Alright, and finally, Prot Pally is the other tank getting a decent sized buff. Now it's a very short list compared to the other two sets of tank buffs, but you know, I think that's fine. This actually winds up having a lot more impact than those laundry lists from above. Paladin is kind of in a similar situation to Blood DK. It's a little behind the pack, just to go back to those log breakdowns. It's a little behind the pack in terms of single target damage here on Taros, but not nearly as bad as Paladin. It's quite a bit behind in AoE damage, but again, not as far behind as Paladin. And in two target cleave, yeah, kind of again, same deal. Behind the pack, not terrible. This buff is targeted at Pally's main sources of AoE and cleave damage: Avenger Shield, Blessed Hammer, and then it also is just a free execute damage increase via 15% Hammer of Wrath damage buff. This is a pretty decent set of buffs and about on par with the buffs to Blood DK, so about 3 to 5% in single target and 8 to 10% in AoE. Similar to Blood DK's, Paladins are in really good shape defensively. Their AoE damage kind of stinks a bit. It's not complete garbage like Blood DK's is, but it's not good, and this is a good buff that will be, you know, enough to bring them back into a competitive position without just hugely shifting the class's overall balance. The one thing that's different here is that this is a defensive buff to Paladin, since they get self-shielding based on damage dealt with Avenger Shield, thanks to this talent right here, Bulwark of Order. So while this is a shorter list of buffs than the Blood DK or Bear Druid sections, I actually think it winds up being more impactful overall, and really good news since I've finally started gearing up my Pally. Pally's a really fun and powerful Mythic Plus tank, and I think it's my favorite to play, personally, and they just got a lot stronger in Mythic Plus. That's good. Okay, this is surprisingly the end of the class tuning for this random weekly reset class tuning day. I like it. I wish they had gone a little further with helping Bear Druids target their main defensive weakness, which is spell damage, rather than just sort of slapping random buffs onto underperforming talents and their base armor and just hoping it fixes their issues, but otherwise, the changes are all pretty good. Protection Warriors are also apparently fine in Blizzard's opinion, which is great. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.